Hello and welcome to Thinking Out Loud. I'm your co-host, Nathan Rittenhouse.
And I'm your co-host, Cameron McAllister.
Happy Thanksgiving week to everybody. It's a busy time in everyone's lives. Certainly has been busy for me. I've been running all over the place. I think I've spoke like 6 out of the last 7 days, and Cameron's been up to all sorts of shenanigans as well. So we're catching our breath here. Looking forward to spending some time with our family and their turkey. Um, and good holiday cheer. I also want to recognize as we get started on this, I think we want to talk about the hideous phrase toxic positivity. So you can put toxic which is about anything these days.
Too many toxics.
Too many toxins in our positivity. Cameron's more adept at understanding what that phrase actually means, is going to get us to parse that out as you think about the benefits of anti-gratitude, perhaps. We'll see where we go with that. But before we dive in neck deep into that, I want to take a moment and recognize that this episode will also be airing on Giving Tuesday. So I don't know if it's an official holiday or it's a tradition within American culture where many nonprofits and organizations take a moment to say thank you to the people who support their work, which we certainly are grateful for. All of you who a little bit or a lot of bit a month chip into what we're doing and really do literally make what we're doing possible. Thinking Out Loud is a listener supported endeavor. And so thank you to each of you who chip in a bit along the way to make that happen. Thinking Out Loud is a toddler organization. We're into our 3rd year now, and recognize that really the future of where we need to go from here is increasing our digital reach. Obviously, we want to continue speaking more, traveling more, doing more events that we're hosting and planning. But really, there's a lot of low hanging fruit for us in the digital reach side of things. And so we're limited. There are just 2 of us. Sometimes we include Stuart in on that, but we can't be everywhere all at once. And so really using technology strategically in a way that helps us multiply our voices into places we just simply can't travel to and connect in ways that we just simply can't do physically really is the upcoming task for us here in the next few years. And the fact of the matter is that when you get to looking at that, software, editors, equipment, personnel to help with that, it's more expensive than we would like it to be. And so if you're at, one of those odd Americans who is looking for something to give $5 a month to here for the next little bit, or end of the year contribution to an organization that you appreciate the content of, we would certainly appreciate being on your list of consideration there as we think about where to go in the future here. Also, if you want to support our work, but you don't have an extra little bit of money, there's a lot you can do to help out. So recommendations are certainly great. If you want to think, who are 5 people that I know who I think would also enjoy listening to Thinking Out Loud, that type of reference recommendation really helps. If you're somebody who loves people and you're more of an extrovert than the 2 of us are, and you want to plan an event, maybe in your city, town, or church, and want to think through what that would look like to invite us to speak in that way, we'd be happy to talk through that with you as well. So you can shoot us an email at info@toltogether.com with any bright ideas, harebrained ideas, good ideas.
Mm-hmm.
We'll evaluate that together, what kind of idea it is, and talk through that with you. But once again, just want to say thank you so much to those of you who are faithful supporters of us, not just financially, but also words of encouragement, kind notes. Those of you who support Thinking Out Loud by sending topics and ideas, books, questions, curiosities that you have, all of that is contributing to the great big little ecosystem of the world that is Thinking Out Loud together. And we love doing this work most of the days. Sometimes it gets a little bit heavy, but we're happy to do book reports and studies and scratch our heads and chins on behalf of the church and those of you who are curious out there. So thanks again. Continue to consider supporting us in any way possible that you can, and pray for us that the Lord would find us faithful and that we would show up in the right place at the right time to really be helpful in the world. So as we get started thinking about Thanksgiving here, heartfelt thank you from Nathan and from Cameron. Literally couldn't do this without you guys. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much. It's hard to overstate how grateful we are for all of that support, and how amazing it is that 3 years later we still get to do this. It's a lot of there are heavy days, but it's also, if you haven't noticed, it's a lot of fun. for us. And we recognize also that it's a privilege to, I'm going to use the phrase of a phrase of a dear friend of ours, to be nerds for Jesus. We get to do that, and largely thanks to you. And also, yeah, your words of encouragement, your prayers, they mean the world to us, because often it can feel a little bit isolated when we're just doing this podcast, just staring at each other, and it sounds like we're just, giving monologues here, but we're not. Turns out we're actually making contact with others, and that really is marvelous. It's also really fun to, travel to different events and then hear people say, "Oh, it's so weird to see you. I'm just so used to your disembodied voice." Or I often get spouses, "Oh, yeah, my wife is so sick of hearing your voice." So that that's great
How's that
too.
for
We're very
underhanded
happy to.
encouragement there? Yeah.
Right, yeah, we're happy to be your companions on your commutes or when you're scrubbing your bathrooms. We are there for you to to give you some food for thought as you're going about your tasks. But we're very grateful. So thank
Ca
you.
Indeed. Cameron, educate me then on, because so this is the time of the year when we're thinking about gratitude, which I think should be foundationally just a Christian orientation and state of being in the world. Obviously, lots could be said that, we don't limit our gratitude to this week in November. But there's a phrase that is kind of new to me. As usual, you're culturally way more on board with what's happening in the real world, that I ran across and just thought, what a weird concept. Tell me about, describe to me, help me understand what toxic positivity is. It almost seems like a contradiction,
Mm.
an oxymoron, but apparently this is the world we live in. And go.
All right. Well, firstly, this is an outworking, I think, of what we would call therapeutic, the therapeutic turn in culture, where increasingly we interpret everything in terms of our own psychological well being. And it's just worth pointing that out because that's a relatively recent development. The soundbite that I like to give here that I think is very helpful comes from Philip Reef. And I mean, he said this a number of different times. This shows up in his Triumph of the Therapeutic. That might be his most famous book. I'm famous as a relative term here, but he said that religious man is born to be saved, but psychological man is born to be pleased. So how does that
Say
factor
that
in
again. Say that
here?
again. Repeat that.
Yeah,
Sorry.
religious man. So yeah, religious man is born to be saved, but psychological man is born to be pleased. So what that means in practical terms is we tend to evaluate our experience of the world or even the meaning of life in terms of subjective satisfaction rather than, so it used to be the venerable ancient tradition. Actually, I mean, down the ages, one way of putting it was you wanted to conform the soul to reality. You wanted to
Mhm.
live in such a way that you were moving with the grain of the universe. And in order to do that, you had to understand the way things actually were. And you had to understand the way you were too. There was a purpose, a telos, and a design to everything. That is very obviously, as soon as you start saying these phrases, it's very clear that this is not the way we live today. Today, we live largely we try to rather conform reality to our own wishes and whims, and that really has to do with a completely different way of looking at the world, where we do tend to think of everything in terms of how it makes us feel. Feelings are a huge evaluative measure for a lot of us. Now, as I say that, I'm just speaking descriptively here, but don't hear me saying that feelings don't matter. That's not what's being said here. So I'm not meaning in any way to denigrate feelings, but we all know that feelings, of course, can are good servants, terrible masters, and they're not always the most reliable indicators of reality.
Mhm.
So that's just a little preamble. Let me
Yeah.
try to give a devil's advocate. Yeah, go ahead, Nathan.
Well, I just one thing on the feelings thing. It's very hard to inculcate feelings in somebody else that they don't want to have.
Hmm.
So let's think of, you're going to see a napkin maybe this week that says, "Give thanks" or "Be grateful." Can we do those things on command? Or somebody's wearing a shirt with a turkey that says "Give thanks" or something. There's
Sure.
a little bit of a hitch in the giddy up there on the, we're expressing something, but it can't really be. It's like telling a kid to be happy. It usually doesn't work.
Well,
So
yes. You're actually getting at something really important there because so if you're talking about the feeling of gratitude or the feeling of happiness, no, you can't just instantly usually will it into being. Now, there are this brings up a host of complications actually, Nathan. So thanks a lot, buddy. I'm
Oh,
just
well,
kidding.
way to go.
But you there
See, that's
are of course
sarcastic Thanksgiving.
artif
What that's toxic
that's right.
positivity right there. I just identified it.
That's right.
Thanks a lot.
Well, there are artificial ways that you can do that. And because one of the obsessions of our day is mood control. And
Mhm.
there are, you can use drugs or various forms of technology to engineer feelings. You can up to a point. It is true. There's kind of a that can be a pursuit that leads to addiction and it grows increasingly hollow. But let me just give some practical examples here. If you decide being with your family is really hard, or not decide, you're just being with your family is difficult, lots of tense conversations and all that. So let's say you walk around with orange juice that's spiked, or you take some edibles just to make it more endurable. Well, I mean, that's a form of mood manipulation and mood control. And you can just, back in the 1970s and the 80s, Valium was very prevalent. People just you
Mm.
need to calm down, just pop a Valium. So that's a form of trying to control your feelings. It's obviously we would say that this is not a helpful practice, and but so there are ways to engineer some of this stuff up to a point. We have a lot of technology. You can also do it just with your smartphone. I think this is the biggest way people do it still. Just fall down the trapdoor of your smartphone, get lost in scrolling or play
Well,
games.
hang on,
That
time
can
out.
do it.
But so
Yeah.
yes, that's engineering a mood, but can you engineer gratitude that way?
No, so where I was going with that is gratitude as a deep inward orientation can include feelings, but it's much more than that. And so, because it's more than feelings and also happiness, so let's not get into this arbitrary kind of distinction people make between joy and happiness. I think that has something to do with C.S. Lewis using joy in a sort of eccentric fashion in Surprised by Joy. That's a
Mhm.
whole other discussion. But look, in
Actually, we have a podcast on that.
the ancient under,
It's in there
we
in the
we
archive.
did. So we can refer you. It's in the archive. But in the ancient consideration, happiness, for instance, had to do not with your sense of emotional well-being or subjective sense of satisfaction. That's what we think of happiness today. We tend to think of it as just a subjective sense of satisfaction. But it had to do with righteousness, really. Blessedness would be the right word.
Mhm.
So if your soul was in the right condition. So and that means it can exceed your present circumstances. So you can be happy when things aren't going well. You can be happy in the midst of sadness in your life. So and that's true, it would be true of gratitude as a deep inward orientation. So that means you don't necessarily need to feel grateful, but this is where the spiritual disciplines for Christians come in. You practices of gratitude. One basic one is giving thanks, which is not something we're supposed
Mhm.
to just do on Thanksgiving. We we pray and give thanks for the food that we ate, for instance, because we recognize food, nourishment, the good things in our lives. We recognize that they are blessings and God's grace to us, and that they're gifts from our Lord. And because of
Yeah.
that, and also there does tend to be, the phrase count your blessings means something, because when we tend to take a lot of the good things in our lives for granted. We just tend to do that
Mhm.
as human beings. But when you start to count your blessings, then you begin to recognize how amazingly filled with gifts your life actually is. And that tends to change your attitude, tends to change your orientation. But my point here is this is a discipline, and
Mhm.
it's one that you won't always feel like doing it. So it's an inward orientation that exceeds feelings. Because it exceeds your feelings, it's not necessarily always going to be something that you feel, but you're going to do it as out of a sense of discipline. But then you will what follows there, the byproduct can be a deep feeling of gratitude. But the
So
feeling is not the whole point.
yeah, well, that just interesting. So I have a friend, you know who you are, who likes to run marathons with no training. And usually, he's messed up for a couple days
Why?
afterward, as you would be. Yeah, yeah. It's just
Why?
like a self torture kind of thing to see. If no, it's yeah. I think going. So here's where I'm going with this parallel is if you're coming into Thanksgiving and you have not been grateful as a orientation and a posture for the year leading up to it, I could expect to see Thanksgiving as a miserable time. If you if you have a or forced, maybe not miserable, but like, this is weird.
Sure.
If you
Yeah.
have a blessedness to your life or a posture of gratitude, and then you're getting together with other people to celebrate a manifestation of that Thanksgiving and gratitude, it seems like there's uh, if it's an orientation of the heart, that there's prior training that is necessary in order to have Thanksgiving well. Maybe I'm stretching that a bit too much, but I was kind of playing with that idea as you were talking
Look,
about, like, really we're talking about a
yeah.
way of life. So, yeah, so for some people, you're going to get to Thursday and you're going to need to spike your orange juice and try to ignore your family as best as possible and get out of there and save face and still be eligible for Christmas present. For a lot of other people, um, it's a
Mm.
time of great celebration and joy, which is a continuation of a way and style of life, and it's going to be fun and great. Uh, One of those requires previous commitments and training and a way of life, and one of those is just to make it through a day.
Well, one brief illustration of how we take so much for granted, and then I want to talk about toxic positivity for a second. But so I had what I assume was a bout of a current strain of COVID. It was pretty gnarly. I had the symptoms that fit rheumatoid arthritis. So I could
Mm,
in the mornings I could barely walk, and I couldn't ball my hands up into a fist. Unscrewing the cap on things in the kitchen was excruciating. It was really strange, and this lasted for about 6 days. And so I was pretty convinced, that it would go away. But there was a moment where I thought, wait, is the whole shape of my life changing from this moment on? And some people, everybody catastrophizes these days, and we have friends who are nurses who are kind of speculating. But it turned out it did pass. But ever since then, every day when I put my feet on the floor, I say thank you to the Lord that I can walk. And I'm aware that there are plenty of people who do have, I mean, they have these episodes on a routine basis, and they have very severe joint pain all the time. But I'm so grateful to be able bodied at this point in my life. Every time I drive to the gym, working out is one of my, one of the only normal hobbies I have. I'm so grateful that I can do that and pick heavy things up
mhm,
and not feel like my wrists are going to shatter. So, and that was one example of just people have said this kind of thing to me before. Don't take your physical capabilities for granted, but I did. And it was just, I wasn't even aware. So sometimes that's just a word of how practices of gratitude, recognizing the blessings in our lives, the things that we take for granted, that can be a contemplative exercise where you begin to kind of
mhm,
move over this inventory of all these items. Being able-bodied, for instance, that many of us who are able-bodied, we simply take that for granted. Many other people don't have that luxury. And so it's recognizing we have so much. And then it's, of course, on the other side of that, you can read from somebody like Johnny Erickson Tada, who's been paralyzed
mhm,
from the neck down since she was very young, and get an amazing lesson in gratitude from somebody who could be very embittered and angry, but who has turned all of that, I mean, the tragedy that befell her, into a tremendous occasion for praise. It's truly
mhm.
amazing. But all
Can
that to say, I mean, the topic of gratitude is immense.
can I throw a word of caution in there? I was actually preaching on this yesterday, that there is a comparative element to gratitude, but the comparison is not between you and someone else, it's between you and what your life could be like. Because I think there are people, "Well, I'm glad I'm not like that person." And so that's kind of a moral high-handed high horse, like, "I can do this, that person can't." Um, Actually, there's a deeper sense of gratitude, and you embodied it well there when you said, "You're not you." So you got a glimpse of how your body could be feeling all the time. And so, like, recognizing that your life could be other than. not in comparison to somebody else, but in comparison to you.
Right.
You go
Yep.
back through all the things that could be just a little bit different that would have massively changed the outcome of your life. I find room for gratitude in comparing myself to myself. I don't need to compare myself to other people's situation in order to be thankful for the way that things are. Even if they're not ideal, I can
Yeah.
anyway, you know what I'm saying. So I think it's gratitude does not
Well, you
come at
don't want
someone
to.
else's
Yeah.
expense.
Right. And you don't want to go down the road of some iteration of thank you, Lord, that I'm not like this person or not. You think of that
Mhm.
that Pharisee and that illustrate. Thank you, God, that I'm not like other men. Right. Want to avoid that. Let's talk about toxic positivity for just a second. I want to I want to try to give a straightforward, or I want to play devil's advocate for a second, and then we can talk a little bit more about what this means. I think, Nathan, to the best of my abilities, what if I can make sense of the phrase, it has to do with people who are pretending that things are all right when they are not. So it would be person who is guilty in the sense of toxic positivity would be a hopeless optimist. An optimist is
Mhm.
somebody who believes that everything will work out regardless of the circumstances. This could give us a good opportunity to tease out the difference between optimism and hope, because those two things are often conflated, but they're not the same thing. But so somebody who is guilty of toxic positivity in this sense is somebody who is not properly sympathetic to the plight of somebody else. Let's say they're going through a grave tragedy, as we do from time to time. Let's say if you've got somebody who is suffering from a terminal illness, for instance, and you're around them and you just spout off either platitudes, which we're let's face it, we're often tempted to do that in those circumstances when we're confronted with serious tragedy. If we're not practiced and we haven't
Mhm.
confronted our mortality, as Christians in the past always do, by the way, Christians have a great track record of meditating very well on death, dealing with it really well, being realistic about it. But if we're a typical modern person, we just think we just need to make somebody feel better,
Yeah.
the temptation is to try to give some soundbite, some answer, or tell them something like, "Oh no, I think let's just be positive. I think you'll be okay after all." Even when there are circumstances where it's just not all right to say that, we're clearly no, we need to be thinking about preparing our hearts for what's next, because there is, unless there's some sort of divine intervention or serious miracle, this isn't going to go well. Or think about a relationship that's crumbled, di- divorce, or you've lost somebody has lost somebody, there's a death. So there are circumstances in life where positivity doesn't fit at all. And there are
Mhm.
because we this is the age of psychological man, I would agree, where we think that everybody just needs to feel good all the time. The temptation is to try to make somebody feel good. And there are circumstances where that is inherently impossible and also deeply inappropriate and offensive. So
Well,
there's the
you want me to
best,
give you an
most
example?
sympathetic reading I can give. Yeah, please do.
So I remember a few years back, my mom's mom died. And she said, it was interesting.
Mm,
Most people tried to comfort me by telling me stories about their mom dying. So she said, my mom died,
mm,
and that's sad. And probably what I didn't need was 10 people giving me a 20-minute story about their moms dying. So it was an attempt to
yeah,
normalize it, but there's also a time where you're like, that's sad. Yeah. So I mean, you're like, okay, you break your leg, and somebody says, well, at least you didn't break both legs. Ah,
right.
like my leg's broken. It's not a so I'm on board with understanding that. Like I think we need to embody well a recognition of there are times when things are broken or bad. That being said, most of the times that I hear a reference to toxic positivity, it is not that deep and thoughtful. It's more like, I'm not thankful for the glitches in my website. I'm not thankful that my car doesn't work the way that I would like it to. Like that's to me, that seems like categorically different than death, physical ailment. Um, I'm not thankful. I saw one. I'm not thankful that I'm overweight. Okay, you live in a world where people starve, and the thing you're not thankful for is an embodiment of the excess in your life. Is that toxic
Mhm.
positivity? Or like, mm, I'm missing something here.
Yeah.
Like, and how do we distinguish between I guess what so I fully understand what you're saying, and I
Yeah.
fully feel justified in rolling my eyes at something else, but I can't quite figure out where do I draw the line there and what's appropriate. Do you have any insight for me?
Well, yeah. It's a terrible phrase, I think. First of all, I think applying toxic to everything, yeah, you have toxic masculinity, you have toxic positivity, and it's a necessarily nebulous phrase. So I tried to, I did the typical try to give the best. I tried to steel man it a little bit,
Mhm.
but the truth is toxic masculinity, toxic positivity can mean pretty much it can mean a lot of things, and it can mean almost whatever you want it to mean in a sense, because it's just not a very
Ooh,
it's not
can
very
I try?
clear. So
Can I
there
try
I think
something?
that's one that might be one problem with it. Yeah, go ahead.
Is toxic positivity fake secular hope? So, if you think about
Well,
you say something about like, yeah, anyway, I was just thinking you take a Johnny Erickson Tata or something like that. I don't think that the
mhm.
message she gives is about positivity.
Okay, so I think we're getting somewhere here. I think there might be some people who would look at Johnny Erickson Tata and they would say, "This is sad. This is an example of toxic positivity." Meaning that, she's trying desperately to put a positive spin on wretched circumstances. She has every right to be embittered and angry. So
Mhm.
this is the side of toxic positivity that I think you and I will find deeply objectionable, because and again, this comes along with psychological man. So if it's all about subjective satisfaction, when that's not possible, and it's all about feelings, when it's not possible to feel those good feelings, then you should have the freedom to give full voice to all of those negative feelings. Again, so long as, and here's where it gets a little weird, so long as you're not hurting anybody else, right? But okay, let's just go with this for a second. So you're paralyzed from the neck down, the neck down, you due to some diving accident that you've had. Yeah, you should be able to be embittered and angry and filled with rage because what happened to you is horrendous. And now, of course, so I'll stop there for a second.
Well,
And
okay,
people who
let's
try to tell you, "No, no, you're still alive," they're actually the villains here because they're trying to impose on you added psychological pressure to try to convert your wretched circumstances into some redemptive story, and it's not there. But
okay,
again,
cancer.
yeah, okay. So let me pause there for a second. Yeah,
No, so yeah, I mean, we don't have to go to the extreme of diving accidents. Cancer, rape, all sorts of
you
relational
ran over your
dysfunction.
dog. Terrible things happen
Like,
in our
yeah,
world. Yeah, all the time. Yep. Family members you hate, neighbors you
and
hate. You have to be
that
around
won't
them
be,
at Thanksgiving.
and won't be redeemed in this life.
Right. So here's what so Nathan and I are not taking issue with, hey, it's bad. We would agree. You don't want to add false positivity into circumstances that are inherently dark or tragic. Fine. But where we would disagree is you should be able to give voice to any destructive emotion that's inside of you. Now, I'm aware I stacked the cards by saying destructive, but there are certain emotions that if you allow them to have sway in your life are deeply destructive. Bitterness is one of them. The most destructive, and it will be most destructive for you yourself if you allow bitterness to colonize your heart. It'll hurt others too, for sure, but it will hurt you most of all. And same with, emotions like envy, jealousy, anger. These are very destructive if we internalize them deeply and we allow them to take control of us. Now, there's a fine line between, you don't want to get to a place where you deny all of these emotions and just repress them. That's fine. But there's also that you can take it in the other extreme and just give full voice to them and just completely indulge all of these emotions. That's deeply destructive as well. There's a balance there.
Yeah, come back around though, because I think what we're doing here is we're going to start splitting between a religious and a secular vision here. Because
Sure.
on one
Yep.
hand, you and I are inhabiting a world where each day we get up and we're grateful for life. We thank God for our meals, every single meal. There's a pattern of
Yeah.
our life of gratitude and a posture and an orientation of recognizing that things could be other than they are, and we receive life and goodness in our lives as a gift. And in the context of that, it is totally fine to be irritated, miffed, angry, broken, sob, moan, wail, shout at God for bad and broken things. I think the Psalms are a great place to look at this
Mhm.
of people really laying into God um, on how they feel about the brokenness and the bad things happening in the world around them. And that's okay. But fundamentally, their identity is not in that. And they do have a broader sense of hope and perspective on what's going on, and the despair is couched within a bigger hope. I think toxic positivity I could see as a real thing if you have no foundation for a future hope. You don't think of your identity as something that you received as a gift. You think that all the information in your life is up to you, including justifying your own existence, your own meaning, and making yourself lovable, and that anything that is going to happen in the future is based off of what you do for yourself. That could get pretty bleak pretty fast. And people telling you they're there, it's okay, is a meaningless statement, so to speak. So I I'm
Well,
sympathetic to
here,
the
let me
phrase as a
yeah.
non-religious person. As a Christian, it's going to make less sense to us. But if we can kind
Mhm.
of compare and contrast it a little bit, I think we might start to see some of the stabilizing effects of legitimate hope. Again, not pie in the sky positivism or optimism, but like how hope provides a ballast to our souls in turbulent times.
Well, I mean, the American way has been predicated on a type of optimism, and I'm drawing my thinking here from a guy named Christopher Lasch. If you know Christopher Lasch's name, it's probably because he wrote The Culture of Narcissism, which is his most famous book. He was a brilliant, really intellectual historian and sociologist. But this comes on his. He wrote a book on the notion of, I think it's called the one and only one and true heaven. I'll make sure I get that title right by the end of this essay. I'm about a third of the way into the book, so I should know the title. But basically, it's on progress, the myth of progress in America. And I'm not gonna. I mean, it's a 600-page book, so very sophisticated argument. But essentially, what he's saying is Americans largely have been optimists because they've believed that in the end, basically through innovation and technology and consumerism, things will continue to improve. But we've reached, because he's trying to answer the question in that book. Look, people still believe things are getting better. And he wrote this book in 1993. So that should tell you something. So in 1993, he was considering just how bad everything really is. And he was trying to ask the question, how is it that in the wake of two world wars, numerous massive, colossal failures on the part of science and, the threat of nuclear proliferation, how is it that we still believe in progress somehow? How does this myth persist in face of such failure? And his argument is that in America, it's a kind of thin view of progress. It's not predicated on some sort of secular utopia. That died a while ago. And it's just predicated on a kind of narrow consumerism where things just, we just keep, the lifestyle goes up. People, can expect more, better, and happier times and more convenience and bigger houses. But now we're reaching a place where there's growing awareness of scarcity now, and we realize that, oh my goodness, our unfettered consumerism is coming with a heavy price tag, and we're actually starting to see real serious ecological problems. And basically our the world doesn't have infinite resources, and it can't feed our voracious Western appetite. That lifestyle, if the entire globe adopted it, it would be curtains. And there's growing awareness of this now. And I don't care how, even the most, politically conservative person is starting to begin to see murmurings of this. There is truth to this. We don't have infinite resources. That vision it's kind of running out of steam. And so, I think that's one reason why you see, there are many, but that's one reason why you see a deep sense of pessimism now because growing recognition of, that's why, by the way, environmental justice is a huge item of concern for younger people who see this and are also
And
living in a
politics.
world filled with these consequences. And
Yeah.
politics. Now, the other big thing is the crisis of meaning, where people have more and more, and it feels increasingly hollow to them as well. There's not the world. That vision of consumerism was still able to motor along on some of the borrowed credit of Christianity, and that borrowed credit came in the form of a feeling of meaning and significance to life. That's going away now. That's almost
So
completely
wait, so
depleted.
hang on a second. Let's back up.
So, yeah,
Rewind a minute. Because
yeah,
so to be clear what we're saying here, since the 1970s, the world each year has produced more food than is necessary to feed the entire population of the planet. So the resource for what's necessary is there. It's massive distribution issues. Um, we can't all live at a lifestyle of the luxury of pick your level of uh, opulence that you want, for sure. And in fact,
hmm
if you're an American, you live in a culture who is borrowing trillions of dollars against our future in order to maintain the lifestyle
right.
that we have right now as well. So even if you aren't talking about natural resources, you can certainly talk about fiscal, financial, monetary theory, and all of that. If your hope is in all of that, if your hope is in, if your longing is for decadence rather than for your daily bread, you're always going to be put in a bitter position toward the future. And so some of being thankful is a is in a is to appropriately calculate what you need, what is necessary, what is sufficient, and what is promised to you from God. And so I think a bit of realism there can go a very long way in
hmm
establishing a posture of thankfulness, but then also our gratitude can manifest itself in limitations on our consumerism. Because basically, advertising works by making you think that you don't have enough. So the more grateful you are for what you have and the degree to which you think you have enough is going to make you a bad consumer. And the reason that this is kind of funny is like what comes the day after Thanksgiving? Black
Black
Friday.
Friday.
So where
Yep.
we
Yep.
pause, we're going to be grateful for what we have, and then the next day it's game on again. Here we
hmm
go. And I hope you all find
Followed by
great Black
Cyber
Friday
Monday.
deals. Followed by Cyber Monday.
Yep.
So like, okay, who knows what I'll buy on Cyber Monday? I don't know, but there's something almost like
Yeah.
defeating about Thursday when we're like, it's like the Mardi Gras in reverse of consumerism and worship and
Mardi Gras
gratitude.
first. Yeah. Well, and hey, for the nerds among you, the book is The True and Only Heaven, and the subtitle is Progress and Its Critics. So that's the Christopher Lasch book I was referencing. But again, if you're Christian hope is not the same thing as optimism. It's a principled sense of expectation that exceeds current circumstances. And if you're a Christian, that principled sense of expectation is rooted in Jesus Christ and his resurrection. And so your hope is not in this world alone. You have hope in this world, of course, but not ultimate hope, but your hope is ultimately in Christ and his coming kingdom. And
Hmm.
that gives you, well, I mean, the scriptural language is you have an anchor for your soul. And that's exactly what it is. And it can allow you to be filled with gratitude, even in the midst of scarcity or in the midst of abundance. If it's actually more difficult, many incisive people have pointed out it's more difficult to be grateful in the midst of abundance than it is in the
Mm.
midst of scarcity, actually. So
Yeah.
when we're doing really well is when we tend to think that we've got it all under control. And again, as Western people wanting to control our moods and control everything, it's all about control for us. We think of ourselves as our own little gods. So sometimes a little adversity is really helpful in dismantling that. Now we have a hand in how we respond to it. If we respond with rage and bitterness, we won't take the lessons to heart, and it'll be much the worse for us. If we learn from it, we can grow in spiritual
Mhm.
maturity. But again, we have a hand in that. So the Christian life requires our cooperation.
Yeah.
So
If you
it's
see
very
yourself
important.
as a if you see yourself as a god, any negative thing is going to seem like an inherent contradiction to the goals that you have in your life. If you see
Violation of
yourself
your will, yeah.
right, yeah, if you see yourself your goal in conforming to the likeness of Christ, for whom suffering was a large part of his identity, um, then you see that what you have is received, even if it's difficult, and that fundamentally changes the posture of your heart toward everything. And so I think these are the types of questions. I think really we just did the introduction of this, Cameron. I think if we sat down and pulled this apart, and hopefully those of you
Mhm.
listening can do this with a friend or a family member or something, is push deeper into what we're getting started here. But basically, this is the type of thing where the rubber really hits the road
Yeah.
on Christian faith and identity and hope and meaning and gratitude and relationships, that it's not theoretical. Like, I think sometimes we kick it around as if it's theoretical, but we all bleed in this world, and therefore the things that we begin to believe are true have a massive influence on the way in which we live, whatever the days of your life that you're given are from here on out. So, be of good cheer. You have deep resources to really celebrate here for the next week and the rest of your life. Be thankful. Somebody pointed out, final note here, that to me, and it's true, that gratitude is the foundation of joy, is the prerequisite for joy. You don't know any joyful, happy people who aren't thankful people. And so you can't
Mhm.
pursue happiness, but
Mhm.
you can pursue gratitude. And when you're grateful, you will find joy in your lives. And that's a wonderful gift. Somebody once said, the joy of the Lord is their strength. And that only comes when we're grateful for recognizing that God is the one who runs the world and allows us to be part of it for now. And then we grin into the unknown of the future, knowing that He's got it in control. And so we live with thanksgiving, even for the unknown, and experience that as joy. And I hope that that manifests itself in a contagious way in your lives this week. You've been listening to Thinking Out Loud, a podcast where we think out loud about current events and Christian hope.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, book Nathan or Cameron, or if you'd like to support us financially, whether through a one-time donation or on a monthly basis, you can do so on the donate page at www.toltogether.com. That's toltogether.com. And please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and sharing this content with your friends. It really does help.